Get right to that breaking news. Just moments ago, a federal judge denying the Justice Department's bid to unseal grand jury records from the criminal case against Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice.
This was a resounding ruling, Anna, totally repudiating the Justice Department's request to unseal these transcripts, really saying that there are no special circumstances here and it's not in the public interest to violate grand jury secrecy by throwing this stuff out to the public, in part because the judge said these materials would reveal nothing new. They're basically a summary of things that are already in the public record from the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. I'll just read from one of the passages here. A member of the public familiar with the Maxwell trial record, the judge wrote, who reviewed these grand jury materials would learn next to nothing new. He said they do not reveal new venues at which their crimes occurred. They do not reveal new sources of their wealth. He's talking about Epstein and Maxwell. They do not explore the circumstances of Epstein's death, and they do not reveal the path of the government investigation. He further said there's no client list in here. There, as you said, there's no allegation that anyone else had sexual contact with minors. And he is saying that really the only decent legal argument to release these transcripts, this was remarkable, is that it would show that the Justice Department's argument for doing so was totally disingenuous and may have been more about distraction than transparency. Those are the words of a federal judge, Anna.
And so, Bear, what's your reaction to this?
I'm not surprised by this, Anna. It is a very high threshold to unseal grand jury materials for good reason. We make this promise to witnesses that testify in the grand jury that these are secret proceedings. And so it really has to be a high public need for these kinds of documents to become public. The judge here very clearly found there was not. The public being interested in the story just doesn't meet what the statute requires. What's interesting to me is that a lot of the arguments that DOJ made at the end about why these documents should be released, the judge actually seemed to say support them not being released. DOJ was saying much of this material was already made public during trial, so really what's the harm of releasing it? The judge flipping that right back, saying, actually, because this material was largely made public during a very lengthy trial, now there is no need to take this extraordinary step of unsealing these records. So it's not surprising, but I'm sure for many people it will be disappointing.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out in this ruling, as we continue to read through this on page 21, so it's a lengthy ruling, he writes of the Maxwell grand jury testimony that this is not a matter of significant historical or public interest. Far from it. It consists of garden variety summary testimony by two law enforcement agents. And the information it contains is already almost entirely a matter of long-standing public record. I mean, Barrett, wouldn't the DOJ have already known this when they asked to have these transcripts made public?
They would. They would have obviously reviewed these documents. And that's what many of us who worked as federal prosecutors have been saying. Grand jury proceedings, by and large, are not as, sexy as many people may think they are. Usually it's not hundreds of witnesses that are testifying for the grand jury. It's one, maybe two case agents that testify, often putting in, large summaries of documents that they've reviewed or people that they've spoken to. Hearsay testimony is allowed in the grand jury, so that's why federal prosecutors are often able to only call one or two case agents as their witnesses. So the federal prosecutors here would have certainly reviewed these documents. They knew what was in them. Again, this may be some type of, trying to serve the client here, saying the client really wants these to be public and we're getting a lot of pressure. So let's make the motion. But definitely they would have known the substance and known that there wasn't anything so groundbreaking in them.
And so, Ken, we know there's a separate judge considering unsealing documents as well. Could that still happen?
Look, there's every reason to believe that this judge, the judge in the Epstein case, who's considering a similar request, will come to the exact same conclusions, because that was also a summary witness grand jury. Neither of these were investigative grand juries where they called witnesses. These were, again, this was an FBI agent going for one day and explaining to the grand jury why there was probable cause to believe a crime was committed, why they should return an indictment. Look, to the extent that there is interesting or titillating information in the FBI files in the Epstein case, they're probably not in this grand jury material. They may still be buried in FBI files somewhere. Things like, files with Donald Trump's name on them or other people's names on them. But like the FBI gathers a vast amount of material in a criminal investigation, and it stays secret for a reason. It is really invasive of people's privacy. It makes unsupported allegations that were never aired in court. That's why it's secret. So the idea that the government would air all that out to satisfy conspiracy theories that unfounded about the Epstein case, I just don't see that happening at the moment.
And of course, we don't want to forget all of the abuse survivors who also weighed in wanting some of these transcripts and records to be unsealed. And the judge writes about that, Barrett. The victim's interest in reviewing the grand jury materials appears to be premised on the understandable but mistaken belief that these materials would reveal new information. Had the government's motion made clear that these records are redundant of the evidence at Maxwell's public trial, the victim's responses to the motion to unseal might well have been different. So, as we've discussed, this is not unexpected necessarily, since it was just these two witnesses who would be involved in the transcript specifically. But Barrett, what about the other exhibits that were presented to these grand juries? Other documents, police files, interviews, recordings? Could that still be revelatory?
It could be. The judge seems to think that's unlikely, but
Federal judge is rejecting the U.S. Justice Department's bid to unseal grand jury materials in the Ghislaine Maxwell case. Let's go to CNN's crime and justice correspondent, Caitlin Polantz. Caitlin, what is the judge saying?
Well, Wolf, the judge is outright rejecting the Justice Department's bid for transparency around the grand jury transcripts that were behind the indictment of Ghislaine Maxwell in 2021. The judge says that the Justice Department's arguments, they just do not fly. The Justice Department wanted to say there was special circumstances here of public interest to want these transcripts to come out. And the judge over and over again, this is Paul Engelmeyer in the Southern District of New York Federal Court, he says that just is not the case. It's not a special circumstance because there's not enough in these grand jury transcripts that would be new to bring to the public anything of substance. Some of the choice words from the judge: the grand jury materials would not reveal new information of any consequence. And this is a judge that has reviewed under seal a lot of these records from the grand jury deciding this situation. Also, the judge is saying in a binder that the Justice Department turned over of things that might not be public, it's only scattered words, clauses, occasional sentences. He says that there would be next to nothing new. There's no there. He also swipes at the Justice Department's reasoning here, this argument that there should be public transparency around these grand jury records, and that's a reason for their for them to be released, to wipe away the confidentiality that is so sacrosanct around grand jury records. And Wolf, the judge says that there could be a perception that this entire attempt by the Justice Department to unseal these records was aimed not at transparency, but at diversion. He says it's disingenuous and there's been a misleading public characterization of what is in these records. He also looks at victims who were writing to the court asking for transparency and says they have been misled too. They are a reason why there should be transparency, but there just wouldn't be anything if these grand jury transcripts were released. Back to you.
All right, Caitlin Polantz reporting. Thank you very, very much, Pamela.
All right, I also want to bring back CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. All right, so Ellie, you're very busy today, obviously, on a lot of fronts. Let's talk about this issue. It goes without saying, this is significant. What is your reaction to the judge's rejection here?
Well, Pam, it's not a surprise. So first of all, there are 3 different motions that DOJ has made to 3 different judges to unseal various portions of the Epstein prosecutions and the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution. Now 2 of the 3 judges have rejected DOJ's motion. The Florida judge rejected the motion relating to the original Epstein prosecution, and now one of the New York judges has rejected DOJ's motion to unseal grand jury records on the Ghislaine Maxwell case. And the reason for that, first of all, grand jury testimony is ordinarily secret. There's a specific federal rule that says you can only unseal grand jury testimony in specific narrow circumstances. And both judges who have ruled so far found none of those circumstances apply here. Usually that applies where some other prosecutor or some other defendant needs the materials. Now, in the case that just came down, DOJ argued, yes, but there's special circumstances. The public has a need for transparency. And as Caitlin just laid out, this judge starkly rejects that. This judge says there's really very little of substance that's new or informative in the grand jury records. Essentially, all of the relevant information is in the indictments themselves. And it's not surprising, Pam, by the way, because the way federal prosecutors usually indict cases is you just put an FBI agent in the grand jury. We know that's what was done here. The FBI agent gives a broad overview of the case that basically tracks the indictment, and then you have your indictment. And so it seems that's exactly what happened here. And the judge therefore says there's no real need for transparency. This wouldn't add anything. Therefore, the motion's rejected.
Let me just follow up very quickly, Ellie, because, the administration could argue, well, look, we're trying to release all this information, but the judge is blocking. But to be clear, this is a small part of the information the administration has in its possession, right?
Very important point, Pam. Yes, the grand jury testimony we're talking about is a sliver of a fraction of the entire file. We know that it's only testimony from 2 law enforcement agents. All the rest of the files, Pam, all the non-grand jury material, the vast majority of the case itself, that's all within DOJ's control. They have to, of course, redact and protect people's identities, but they could put that out today if they wanted to.
All right, Ellie Honig, thanks so much.
New this morning, J.D. Vance, in a new interview, is pushing back against the criticism coming at the Trump administration for how they have handled or fumbled the Epstein saga. The vice president now trying to shift the narrative and blame Democrats.
I laugh at the Democrats who are now all of a sudden so interested in the Epstein files. For 4 years, Joe Biden and the Democrats did absolutely nothing about this story.
And there are new numbers this morning showing something of a shift in how Americans are feeling about this. Harry Anton, here to help. What are you seeing in these numbers?
Yeah, I would say that this is from at least a political...
Like this is bad news for Trump. It's actually less bad news for Maxwell, right? In my opinion. In my opinion, I feel like she won this. She kind of trapped Trump here because it looks like what Trump was trying to do was pretend like he wanted to give the people the documents, but only give them in a very limited capacity by sharing just a sliver of the grand jury testimony and probably, editing what was released even from there. He would be able to either put the blame on somebody else or just absolve himself, being like, well, I wasn't mentioned in any of this, and so blah, 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 even though the grand jury testimony might not include the real dirt on Donald. That might be buried deeper in the investigation files and whatnot, right? And so Maxwell comes out as the winner here, unfortunate as it is for justice and for Donald, right? Usually it's bad news because Donald now cannot rely on using these documents as partial absolution. So who has more power now? The only living person that's confirmed at the center of this whole affair, Ghislaine Maxwell. Jeffrey Epstein is gone. No one else has been definitively implicated. We all have our rumors and our allegations and our, well-founded theories. But it's right now it's her and Jeffrey, and then everybody else is just in this maybe pile, right? And so now she has full power, especially if these documents don't come out, to say, oh, this person is clean, this person isn't. I know this, I know that. I never saw Donald do anything dirty, and now he's fully over the barrel to her, because if she doesn't save him, and he has nothing else to corroborate a story that protects him independent of her, she has all the leverage on him.